And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Karen Davila, and let me welcome you to the Philippine Stars Property Report PH webinar on building integrated communities for a sustainable future. Now, various happenings such as COVID-19, the typhoons that we've experienced, floods, rapid urbanization have broadened the scope of our lenses. The discussion on sustainability once focused on all things green. Now we are pivoting towards a more holistic approach, specifically raising awareness on how sustainable housing policies must tackle the affordability, social justice, cultural and economic impacts of housing, and how it contributes to making healthy residential neighborhoods and sustainable cities. Today, we've seen developing countries making strides in this arena. UN Habitat said the so-called pro-poor housing programs often provide accommodation of poor standards in remote locations with little consideration to the lifestyle of people. Yet in most developing cities, decent and safe housing remains to be a dream. As we delve into this topic, we're going to answer pivotal questions and find out, is the Philippines ready for sustainable communities? And what does that exactly mean? Are we taking the necessary steps in order to create these communities? Are integrated communities a step towards the right direction? Joining us in this discussion today, we have Chris Rollo, UN Habitat Country Program Manager. Hello, Chris. Chris has been with UN Habitat for the last 14 years. He's provided support to the national government in preparation for the Philippines' new urban agenda, the development of the national guidelines for local shelter planning, and the enhancement of the national urban development and housing framework. It's so nice to finally meet you, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. It's my pleasure to be here.
All right. And we also have David Lichu. He is the co-founder and CEO of one of the country's leading professional real estate brokerage services in the country with over 20 years of experience. Hello to you, David.
Hey, Karen. Thank you for having me.
All right. And completing our panel is SMDC President Jose Marie Banzon. Joe Marie has decades of experience in the real estate industry. Hello to you, Joe Marie. He joined SMDC in 2013 as their EVP. And over the last 14 years, he steered SMDC into its market leadership position, known for trailblazing efforts in the condominium segment of real estate development and in redefining the urban dwelling landscape. Joe Marie, it's so nice to meet you finally.
Thanks for inviting me to this webinar.
Yes, as we start the panel discussion, Chris, why don't you start it off? It was mentioned earlier that the term sustainability no longer revolves around green. In what context should sustainability be viewed today in the context of urban planning?
Yes, thanks for that question, Karen. Sustainability is where the triple dividends of society, economy, and the environment benefit the present and future generations. So using the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN as a framework, this would refer to the 5 Ps of people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. In terms of urban planning and housing, there are a number of aspects, but I would like to focus on land use and the promotion of compact cities with efficient densities to avoid urban sprawl. Recent studies have shown that the rate of growth of urban land use globally is almost double that of population growth. This is also true in many cities in the Philippines, particularly the metropolitan areas. And this has negative impacts on the environment, including the encroachment into agricultural and protected areas, inefficient service delivery, increased carbon footprint, among others. So compact cities and communities maximize the use of urban land and promote economies of scale and efficient services. Integration happens at various scales. At the community level, integration could mean mixed uses, So that means residential, commercial, public services, public open spaces, mixed income classes. So from rich to the middle class, and even some of the more of our disadvantaged members of society. It's walkable, nature-based design of public spaces. And this neighborhood or community is integrated at the city scale and forms an integral part of the city land use plan and the local shelter plan. Thus, an integrated community should link with the rest of the city in terms of mobility options, communication, markets, and services. And so integration should be at the physical, social, economic, and environmental spheres. And lastly, integrated communities are inclusive.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Chris, right? So the old perspective of what essentially is sustainable, because everybody thinks it's just about it being green. And now it really is about, will it last for many years? Does it answer all the needs emotionally, mentally, also environmentally? Integration makes it more livable. So it has to answer all those needs that you had mentioned. Now, David, on your recent studies, would you say that the Philippine real estate landscape has evolved in that way? And I want you to be honest, because Chris said earlier that it would be, integration would be in different income classes. And I have to ask you if you already see that in Metro Manila, frankly.
So yes, we are seeing it, and it is a lot better than it was 20 years ago. And the best metric I can give you is the fact that in the last 25, 30 years, we have built 50 townships within Metro Manila. And if you consider the map of Metro Manila versus the entire landmass of the country of the Philippines, it is a speck, right? And yet that speck is responsible for 40% of the GDP of the country. Not only did we build 50 townships within the last 25 years in Metro Manila, but we are building about 120 to 150 townships outside of Metro Manila. And the infrastructure that was lacking in servicing the population prior to this boom of townships is now being serviced. What do I mean? Very basic things like access to clean water on a 24/7 basis, as need basis, access to emergency power, waste management, particularly solid waste management, has been addressed. The big townships are the only places in the Philippines where you have access to sewage treatment plants. I've been told by my friends in Manila Water and the other company, Maynilad, that only 12% of the population have access to sewage treatment plants, which means that everything we flush goes straight to the rivers and the ocean. So the 60, 100, 200, 1,000 years of neglect of infrastructure, either because we just didn't plan better or we didn't have the financing, the financial stability to afford these infrastructure projects, are now being addressed. It will take another 20 to 30 years from today to make up for the 60, 100, 200 years that we didn't address these issues. But it has dramatically improved.
Okay, thank you so much, David. It's quite the numbers that you gave, the percentage of which areas have sewage system in Metro Manila. We'll go back to that later on. Going to Jo Marie now. Jo Marie, hearing both you and Habitat and now the real estate standpoint from David, SMDC has been building, you are the leader. How does SMDC define sustainability? Let's talk about corporate wise. No? What do you look for? What is the vision, mission in terms of SMDC in defining sustainability?
Thank you, Karen. When SNDC looks at sustainability aspect of our developments, we view it in terms of the three pillars of sustainability. As Chris mentioned, that's economic, environmental, and social. On economic, we strive to keep our residential units affordable and housing available to a larger Filipino population. We also ensure that the development is conveniently located, accessible, so that people can easily go to their place of work. And since our residences belong to integrated developments, they produce plenty of employment opportunities, such as not only for the residents but also for the community. Employment opportunities, security, in property maintenance, such as janitorial and repairs, even in services, food, retail, wellness, even in banking. Uh, on the environmental part, we ensure that our buildings have all the basics of green development. We collect and store rainwater to be used later for cleaning the common areas and for the watering the landscape. We also use LED lighting to reduce energy consumption. We have vast green gardens and amenities where up to 60% of the land in our developments is actually devoted to open space. We design into our buildings plenty of natural light and ventilation. What's more is that we emphasize disaster resiliency. In compliance with the building code in the Philippines, our buildings can actually sustain the country's earthquakes and storms. And we actually have in place emergency response teams trained to quickly address dire situations. On the social aspect, we ensure that our developments offer our residents a safe and secure environment that provides opportunities for interaction and community activities. Our lobbies are elegantly designed like hotels, our swimming pools, lush gardens. That's why property management is very important. They have to make sure that the buildings are painted regularly, broken tiles are repaired, busted bulbs are replaced, common areas are cleaned, so that 10 years from now, it's just as new as when you just.
I'm curious, Jo Marie, you did mention the importance of making sure that your facilities will withstand, right?
Yes.
That it will withstand the years to come. Before I go back to David, but what about the issues? For example, we've seen just recently, how Ulysses and the series of typhoons actually hit not just Metro Manila but several parts of the Philippines, and SMS developments in all those areas, right? From this situation that really makes all developers say, we have to not just build back better, but frankly, build back more resilient and build back to last.
During the Typhoon Ulysses, during the storm, our property management companies in the different developments were reporting to us on a real-time basis to assess the damage. Admittedly, there was some damage, but actually quite minor because our buildings have been built to withstand such typhoons. So they're quite resilient. In addition to that, our building management companies had training on safety. So they knew what to do during crises such as these to keep our residents safe.
Okay, so David, is the Philippines right for these integrated communities, and is now the time to build? I mean, slowly we are seeing the economy opening up, and just in front of my building, I can see already that construction has resumed, and yet you also have banks not releasing a lot of money.
So yes, it is the time to build. Now, just look at what happened in the last 20 years. In the last 20 years, our per capita income went from $1,500 to 3,000 something US dollars per capita. And that's still one of the lowest in Southeast Asia. Okay? One of the lowest in the world, one of the lowest in Asia Pacific. And yet, so much wealth was created, and the middle class started to mushroom in the last 20 years. Now, if you look at what JP Morgan says, UN, World Bank, IMF, and all these other financial institutions say that the Philippines is going to be in the top 20 fastest growing economies in the next 30 years. So we're going to have this massive long runway of 30 years of economic growth, faster than many, many, many countries. And that would just mean more demand for real estate.
Chris, coming from UN Habitat, how do we include those in the lower sector in this whole integration discussion? You know, when you listen to David and Jo Marie, we're talking about essentially, you can go middle class to the very upper class and maybe even a little of the lower middle class. But we are not yet really speaking about how to integrate the poor into this integrated sustainable city. Usually is they're encouraged to be building outside of Metro Manila. They're not able to really enjoy the benefits and facilities of this sustainable integrated city, Chris.
What we really promote in UN Habitat is that everybody in the community, in the city, should be involved in the actual housing plan of the city. So integrated community should be planned, designed, and financed with the participation of the existing community, even as they aspire to be accessible to those who are not yet part of that existing community. And when we talk about access to housing, we're talking about a spectrum of land and housing rights that should be considered in the choices of people, of residents, of the market. So when we talk about the spectrum, it spans from consent of use of a house to rental to use of rock, to long-term lease to full ownership, and all other rights across that spectrum. Because different people have different housing needs in different stages of their lives. So the minimum standards for livability of houses should be observed, considering the capacity of people to pay for the housing options that they choose. That's why dense housing development provides a good business case for the establishment of agglomeration economies or economies of scale. So, like for example, for mass public transportation, public services and facilities, utilities, LRTs and MRTs, for example, can only be economically viable in a dense urban context. For example, electricity consumption of one condominium building can be more than the consumption of a whole municipality, which needs kilometers of electric wires to serve distant houses. So the maximizing the use of vertical space can free up areas for public open spaces with multiple uses. And public open space is available for everybody, rich or poor. That is where people meet as equals. And of course, as you also noted, the displacement of urban residents to cheaper, far-flung areas should be avoided so as not to deprive people of their livelihoods and access to urban facilities and services.
So based on your definition, technically, it seems to me that we are not yet integrated. I mean, if you go to other cities all over the world, I mean, let's put it even to Singapore, but then the poverty level there would be very difficult to compare. In Metro Manila, it's not like that at all. Take Quezon City, Chris, for instance. A valuable piece of land when it was recently bought, right, by big conglomerates or big real estate companies. The solution of the local government essentially was to transfer, well, of course, pay off, but move all the residents to either Montalban, Rizal, or a far-flung area. And I'm not even speaking about many years back. I'm speaking of today. And that area today in Quezon City, which is near ABS-CBN, is a beautiful area now. There's a hotel. There's already there's little clinics. There's stores, etc. But it doesn't it doesn't follow what you just said of the residents, whether rich or poor, should be stakeholders and have a say.
Correct.
Because the ideal setup of integration is you don't really kick the poor away, right?
Correct. Yes.
You put a portion there where they still live there and use vertical housing. But that's not in the Philippines, huh? Vertical housing in the Philippines is still a lot of money that can be sold, right? So we're not, based on your definition.
Yeah, we are going there very slowly. Right now,
How are we
still,
going there? How are we going there? Can you
yeah,
give me a city
yeah. For example,
so that we
you
are
know,
going there?
Quezon City, where it used to be occupied by informal settlers, but
Yes.
then the landowner and the informal and the community decided to redevelop the property. The frontage of the property was so the community was part of the planning and redevelopment of the area. The prime area was given to the homeowner to build the structures, and then the back part of the area, that's where the communities also remained and stayed with their own.
What area is this? I'm really curious.
Yeah, I forgot the name, but that was shared by the housing office of Quezon City. We can check
Oo.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's one good one.
Yes, and also there are, like, for example, in Valenzuela, in the Amvaca property, it's a community-led, community-driven development, where it's the community themselves, through the community mortgage program of the Social Housing Finance Corporation, they bought the land, and then they actually built five huge medium-rise buildings for the whole community. And it's the community that planned for it. They contracted their own developer. And of course, since they don't have upfront money, they had to go through the community mortgage program of HSFC, so that payment can be paid to the landowner. And then the homeowners can pay it over a period of time, around for 25 to 30 years. So
Yeah.
there are many schemes now ongoing in the country, all over the country.
Okay. Now, for Jo Marie, I know that SMDC, a way that SMDC made an effort to integrate, right, the lower income, so to speak, is to reintroduce a new way of living. You know, Filipinos always believe that you're only the only way to live is you if you actually have a house and lot, right? And SMDC has reintroduced that no, you can you can live in the city in a vertical space, and it doesn't have to be big as what you imagined it to be when you were younger, but you can also redefine that as a new way of modern living. Because in many parts of the world, you go to Hong Kong, the living space is so small, right, Jo Marie? Or even
Yes.
Japan, frankly, and yet they work in the city. What do you look at when SMDC? What are your considerations?
When we look at developments, we start by looking at the property. Of course, we have to buy the property. We have to we have a big budget actually for property acquisition. We continue to buy every year. And David Lee Chu will attest, though, that we don't just buy any property. We do our due diligence. Um, we have to make sure that it's not flood prone, it's not on an earthquake fault, and more importantly, the accessibility is there for public transportation and so on. So it's easy, and you can also build a mall there. Location of the property is important. And then when we design all of the features of the green building, of convenience. We have our malls, we have our, as I mentioned, the hotel-like lobbies and the resort-themed amenities to enhance the lifestyle of the residents. As you pointed out, the living space may not be big, but then your living room is big because you invite your guests, you stay in the lobby, and
Yeah.
it's comfortable, it's air conditioned, it's Wi-Fi, it's very elegant actually. Um, just to talk about what Chris was saying on vertical developments. Actually, you have to segregate because you of course have the middle class and you have the lower than middle class. Okay,
Yeah.
but the middle class, they're the ones who are buying our vertical developments in Metro Manila.
Yeah.
Vertical developments in Metro Manila is very practical because the land prices here are very expensive already. So the
Correct.
only way you can offer affordable housing is if you build many dwellings and spread the cost of the land on the units, and
Yeah.
then pass on that savings to their buyers, so that you give them their condominium units, but then you give them sprawling amenities and very nice hotel like lobbies. Now and then you have that's the middle class, and as David was saying. Um, the Philippines has evolved. It's already a very fast-growing economy. I think, well, now there's a little bit of a hiccup with the pandemic, so things are slowing down. But then once this pandemic blows over, and now they already have a vaccine, the Philippines will recover very quickly, I believe, because we have the fundamentals are here. We have an educated, young, and hardworking population. English speaking, we're actually the employee of choice of the world. And because of that, there's a lot of affluence coming to the Philippines. So you have a very fast rising middle class. And this middle class are the ones who are buying our vertical developments
Yeah,
here in
yeah.
Manila. And also in other cities like Davao and Iloilo and Cebu. Now, but then we target the OFW market as well. And that many of them look for landed properties
Yeah.
in the areas where they actually grew up. So we're developing horizontal developments in areas like central Luzon and in southern Luzon and also in Vismin. And to put the
With
integrated
ready housing? With ready
so-
housing already?
yes,
Wow.
lot
Okay.
and lot. And we're
Oh.
integrating because I mean SM we're the biggest mall developer. So all the time, our horizontal development will have a commercial element. It's either
Yeah.
there will be a mall there or some kind of commercial strip mall. But then there'll always be that convenience that we'll be offering.
No,
our
and
market.
I wanted to share with you just as a matter of conversation is so I'm the eldest of three, and my youngest brother actually lives in SM Light.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, so SM Light. Did I say that it's SM Light? So it's the condo by EDSA in Mandaluyong.
That's right. And there's a mall there. We built a
Yeah,
mall.
there's a mall there, and I wanted to say that I am so impressed because it's so modern. I mean, his apartment, he lives with a cousin, so they're both guys, and it's so modern. And they go down to the gym, and then of course they use the pool, and they walk to the mall. They buy food there, so I understand.
There's a
And
cinema.
he doesn't want to go back to living in our house in Parañaque. He doesn't want, simply because life, he says, is so much more convenient and easier, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So my next question
Yeah,
is, how then do we include, the mantra of this government is an inclusive economy, right, Christopher? So how do we include, for example, let's say slightly lower than middle class, but would be able to live in the city? Is that still possible, so that they can just take that one Jeep ride to work? How is that still possible, Chris?
Yes, that is really the challenge. We say that the urban land is really very expensive in the city, but actually, when I think the government has conducted a survey of idle lands in the city, there's a lot of idle lands.
Yeah.
And many of these are actually idle because of speculation. They have a lot of land issues. But if many of these are actually freed up, the recent study of the Department of Housing and Urban Development says that the amount of urban land that are idle in the metro is
Really?
enough to house,
Wow.
yes, to house the housing needs of the informal families and
Yeah.
even the lower income
Oo.
groups.
But the problem, Chris, is who's going to pay for that? I mean, this is still Habitat for Humanity, UN Habitat.
UN Habitat. UN Habitat is the UN agency. Habitat for Humanity is an international NGO.
Yeah.
But who will
But
pay for that?
you're not connected.
They are our international partner.
Yeah. The reason I asked is because with Habitat for Humanity, you have donors paying for everything. So if you integrate the low income to the city, who's going to pay for that?
There are a lot of options. As I mentioned earlier, there was a community mortgage program. This actually helps organized homeowners association to buy their land. And usually that caters to informal settlement communities that are already in the city. and then they organize and buy the land where they are already living in, and then redevelop that. In fact, I remember there was a 50 billion program of the government.
Yeah.
That was actually one of the approach. Money was funneled into the national government to be able to redevelop these communities and with minimal displacement from where they already are. So, and that's why there was what we call the people's plan. People have to be part of the site selection, of the planning of their communities, and you'd be surprised. They actually have resources. These informal settlements actually already represent resources, personal resources of people. When they build their houses, when they build their economies around it, those are personal investments. And people, when you go there, many people are actually renting these spaces, so they have money.
Okay.
There has to be a system in place.
Yeah. Now, I want to put David and Jo Marie in the discussion. What is also government's role in all this? I mean, there's a lot of expectation with the public sector, but we do know that in Western countries, I mean, let's not even go that far. Just go to Singapore, for example. There's when Lee Kuan Yew followed, or his generation did the urban planning, the poorer segment of Singapore was not left out, right? You see, I've seen these communities, the minorities are there, and the vertical living spaces look beautiful, but clearly the government shouldered a lot of that too, right? So what is, I'm curious. Go ahead, Jo Marie and David, feel free. What is the government's role in this integrated space dream that we all want, that Chris is saying?
Well, in our case, we do a lot of our planning, and as far as we're concerned, infrastructure that the government has been providing, especially the road network, right, that allows you to travel, for example, from Batangas to Metro Manila. Before it would, let's say, take 2 hours, now it'll just take an hour, so that makes it more convenient for our residents. We can buy properties there, which is cheaper, build their horizontal development, and it won't take very long anymore for them to get to Metro. So that helps the infrastructure.
That's good, yeah.
Another important aspect is the incentives that they give the developers, like the tax incentives, like the BOI. If you develop housing outside Metro Manila up to 2 million, you don't have to pay income taxes at all. So it's
that exists now. That exists now, or does that exist?
Actually, they revise it. Currently, that's the level. It's 2 million outside Metro Manila. So they give incentives for the developers so that at least if they do not have the financial capability or the infrastructure to build the socialized housing, the economic housing, at least they give the developers incentives to do it for them. So we've been working with the government very closely on that.
Okay, David. I mean, clearly, you handle a lot of very wealthy clients, but what should the government do too? What is their role? You know, I was in China for the World Economic Forum a few years back, and it's amazing. Tianjin to Beijing used to be 3 hours. So people couldn't live in Tianjin if they worked in Beijing. But Beijing was so expensive. So the government built a bullet train, like an electric train. And then Tianjin to Beijing became 30 minutes. So then, by just building that without a population and housing yet in Tianjin, of course, since there was a train, suddenly there was housing that sprouted in Tianjin. So David, what's government's role too in this whole integration story?
It's a complex question that deserves a complex answer. But I think that's the pitfall of a chaotic democracy. Number two, we have many laws in the Philippines that cover, every aspect of humanity and the way we should take care of citizens. But where we fail constantly is implementation. For example, the safety net that Pag-ibig provides, the safety net that that PhilHealth provides. All the policies are there. We just have to bloody execute it properly.
Yeah.
But because of the lack of controls, or I should say, the hyper regulation of checking, the counter checking, everyone is watching so many people, but at the end of the day, we just end up conniving to game the system. And so I think that's why many times you have to figure out, is it really the structure of the government or is it the people? Well, I think it's both. The other thing is, for example, what one of the biggest credits we can give to this administration is the fact that the TROs, the temporary restraining orders, and the right-of-way issues have become significantly less. The best compliment that maybe Mr. Ramon Ang ever gave the president publicly was involving infrastructure projects. The reason why we were able to build that skyway of San Miguel and Metro Pacific at record time is because the government stepped in and said, get the hell out of the way, and I mean it. And because of that, we're able to build these bridges and skyways. Now, part of the problem is that you've got Metro Manila, which comprises 13, 16 local government units, big and small. I mean, we are so fragmented that you cannot do anything holistic to service the 12 million, 15 million users of Metro Manila without doing everything 13 times or 16 times. So these are structural issues that need to be addressed, and it's painful to do it, but frankly, if there's anybody that can do it, it's this government, because this government has the highest political capital any administration has had since the early days of President Marcos. And one of the ways we can leverage on that is to just bulldoze our way to make infrastructure projects happen and to make the enforcement of reasonable and sound policies happen. Because the rules are all there, the policies and the safety net are all there, except that we are not enforcing it right.
Okay, wow, that's well said, because it's true, honestly speaking, when you compare us to our ASEAN neighbors. Chris, why don't you chime in on that?
Yes.
The words integration, sustainability, it's thrown around, frankly, like it's so easy. But really, to integrate is, when you look at countries that have integrated well, it's sound planning, political will, it's overcoming all these challenges that David has just mentioned. You'd have more people not fitting themselves in Metro Manila, but traveling easily to Metro Manila, right? Without stress. I mean, one of the things I realized during this pandemic is when you're a little wealthier, you can go out and drive your car and go to work. And yet there is no public transport outside. So for the carpenter, the BPO, call center agent, the sales girl, it's so expensive to grab to go to work. So that's a classic one. It's a classic story of non-integration right there, right?
Yes.
So what would be a wish list in the Metro Manila setup for you that would spell integration in a practical way?
Yes. First, there has to be a honest to goodness Metro Manila urban plan. We have had so many attempts at that, but I don't think we really have one plan that will guide all the 16, 17 local governments in Metro Manila in one vision. So that breeds a lot of dysfunctionalities and a lot of inconsistencies in local policies. And that's why when we look at Metro Manila, it's supposed to be one big urban agglomeration with an efficient system, but the systems are not as efficient as already explained earlier because of many, little kingdoms within it. I would like to go back to what government can do for the housing problem. for me, one basic thing is for the government to put their money where their mouth is. When we look at the housing budget,
Yeah.
annual housing budget, it's only less than 1% of the national budget. You were talking about how Singapore had a very good housing program because they have 10% of their national budget in housing.
Mm,
So, and then also when you look at the housing options, many of the housing developments are really, for sale. But
Yeah.
what we are asking now for the government, and I know they're working on this, is a public rental housing program. Many
Yeah.
people do not want to own houses at many points of their lives. They just want to have a secure place to stay. And public rental could be one of them. But we don't have a public rental housing program at present.
Yeah. And a public rental program, the reason that's important is it's cheaper than
Yes.
yeah, because it's a program that really aims to have the lower income live in the city. So technically, it's the government you're paying to. It's
Yeah.
not a private individual who owns the property. Now, moving on to the COVID pandemic, as we move on to closing our discussion, Jo Marie, how did your developments change homeowners and urban dwellers, especially during the pandemic? We've been locked down for, I think, at least 8 months.
Our residents were pleasantly surprised that living in our developments is perfect when you're under a lockdown situation because
That's nice.
they didn't have to. Yeah, you just had to go downstairs, and we always have we're either next to a mall. We built our small mall downstairs or a commercial strip, so you get your basic necessities, your groceries. You can do your banking.
Yeah.
Even during the pandemic, and even after the city opened up and there was no more lockdown and you had to go to work, many of our residents actually didn't even have to commute, and they avoided the crowds in the MRT, for example, because they just walked to work, especially here in the Mall of Asia area.
Yeah.
It's very convenient for them.
That's very nice. Yeah. No, and there's in the Mall of Asia area, there's also there's air, right?
That's right.
Ganun din eh.
And the
So
sea
masarap
breeze.
doon, di ba, David? Para ka na sa Punta Fuego. Di naman. Pero at
Oy,
least,
Karen, di
there's
na
a
tayo
breeze.
natutuloy sa Punta Fuego.
Oh, nga. Oh, but there's some breeze. There's some breeze. So, Jo Marie, you have years of experience under your belt. How do we now measure the success of a property developer's integrated community project? Then I'll ask all of you that. So, Jo Marie, first, how do you measure success?
Well,
That
by
is
the
sustainable,
projects.
integrated. How do you see it after it's built? After.
Oh, by the project's completeness, it should allow people to have everything they want, and everything they want and they need within a few minutes away, or just even just by walking outside, and that at least, and they should have a nice living experience. As I said, you have to provide them with all the amenities that you spoil them, basically, luxurious amenities, so that at least they can enjoy a very comfortable life.
I'm curious, before David answers that, can you share some of the specific projects that you've completed so far? And among these projects, where are you now? Especially, I mean, there's been a delay in construction.
Okay, well, on the completed projects, because we actually have as many integrated developments as we have residential projects, because you always put a commercial element if it's not next to the mall. Of course, our bigger ones are in North EDSA, and our flagship, which is in MOA, which is complete. It has a sizable mall. It has, of course, our residential, hotels, office. We also have Mall of Asia area. We have a school, a NU. We have a convention center. We even have an arena. And then in all of we have 35 residential projects, and all of them have a commercial element. So that's how many integrated projects we have. And they've all quite developed a thriving community very quickly. So that it's been quite successful. We're quite happy with the way it's turning out. In terms of construction,
you also launched
construction, we've actually catching up with our schedule. There was a lot of pain, and we had to comply with a lot of the requirements of building barracks, keeping people inside. the construction workers. But we're catching up on the construction. We're not too far behind, maybe about 6 months delayed, but that's tolerable.
Yeah. And you also launched two integrated districts, the Gold Residences across NAIA 1.
That's right. Gold residence across NAIA 1. That used to be where the casino is. It's at 11 hectares. It will have, well, of course, residential and an office and a commercial component. The second phase of our South residences, which is in Las Piñas, actually behind the SM South Mall. Again, you have a mall there. You have BPO offices. So that promises to be as successful as our other developments.
Yeah. Okay, David, you've sold many properties in the last 20 years. Based on what you've observed, what's the measure of success when it comes to integration and sustainability? I mean, some of these properties right now are run down or they've become irrelevant, but how do you measure them?
I think the biggest metric for me would be how the market responds, and I'm gonna give a statement which has nothing to do with the fact that SMDC is here, right, or SM is here, but the fact that SM is SM Prime and SMDC is the largest property company in the Philippines. It is the largest company by market cap in the Philippines. The fact that when Big Boy came up, Henry C. Jr. came up with this idea back in mid-2000, people were saying, what the heck are you doing selling 20 square meter units, 25 square meter units? Who's going to live in these things, these massive buildings? Is there enough infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? The first units in the Bay Area that they built. So I think the first project was Meza in the early 2000s, and then they built up to the first projects in the Bay. When they launched the first projects in the Bay, they were selling under 2 million pesos. Today, the same asset is worth 7 to 8 million pesos.
Imagine that.
Many times, I have gone publicly saying that actually in the last 15 years, one of the best, if not the best assets you could have bought were SMDC projects in the mid-2000s, in the mid to late 2000s, because no other condominium projects have appreciated the way they have in the last 12, 15 years as SMDC's projects.
Yes.
And that's a factor. And the second thing is, they have really democratized owning property, because the access to the big fancy pool, the access to the jogging path, the access to secured housing, meaning nobody's going to break into your house, was only made available at a scale that happened because of SMDC. They made those things available to the regular person.
Yes.
You can only access 25-meter pools, 50-meter pools in private high-end condominiums like Pacific Plaza or One Rojas or in the country club. Very, very exclusive. And that was democratized by SMDC. I mean, there were many condominium developers pricing themselves between 2 to 2.5 million, but they didn't provide those amenities the way SM has done. And I think the market has responded to that favorably when you look at the asset appreciation over the 12 years. So it's not a blip, it's a long-term sustainable event. Yeah. And you also look at the stock price of SM.
Yeah.
Those two things validate the market.
Wow, that's brilliantly said. I have to say, Joe, I don't think you can get a better description on the metric success than that particular description. Now, Chris, of course, Joe Marie and David are coming from the private sector. They have different metrics, but let's talk about it, in a socialist point of view, so to speak. What would be your metric of success, right, with integration?
Yeah, with integration, I really look at the scale of the city. you say an integrated community is an integrated part of the city when it is permeable. So really, when we say permeable, it's not a vast gated community
Okay.
that is an island unto itself, and the rest of the city will have to drive around it to other parts of the city. That's one. Second, for me, it should be inclusive. So that part is exclusive. That's why we have really a city of the rich and a city of the poor.
Yeah.
And you can see this spatially, visually, and hopefully over time we see less and less of that. And of course, Paris has made this a very common byword already, a 15-minute city, where everything is within your reach in 15 minutes. And for me, an integrated community is like that. You can access everything within 15 minutes from where you live. UN Habitat actually works mostly in cities outside of Metro Manila, what we call the secondary cities, because this is where the urban growth is fastest.
Yeah.
And this is also where local capacities are lacking. And that's why we focus many of our efforts outside of Metro Manila. Maybe just an example of one housing community development that we did was post Yolanda, where people were their houses were really destroyed. This one is in Rojas City, and people had to rebuild. But in that rebuilding of their community, people were at the center. They chose the site, not far from where they are. They designed their houses. They helped build their houses, and they even did quality control as the houses were built. And then, because they were part of the process, when they were incrementally building, so when they had extensions of their house, they know how to extend their house using the same technology, using the same materials that were used for their houses. So that's building, not just building houses, but building the capacities of people to build their own communities, to strengthen the social cohesion within them. Because an integrated community is really a community where people know each other, where people live each other and share common spaces and the urban commons. So really, for me, an integrated community is a community that everybody is included and that it grows over time, because COVID or not, the Philippines' urban growth will continue.
All right. Thank you so much, Christopher Rollo. And I want to thank our panelists this afternoon. I really enjoyed it, frankly. It's nice meeting you. One day we will meet, they call it now IRL. It's called Real Life. And not on Zoom. But I want to thank you so much. It's been an honor, the Philippine Star, for having me. Jo Marie Banzon, President of SMDC. Thank you, sir. Of course, David Lichu, my good friend, CEO of Lichu Property Consultants, and Christopher Rollo. I think that was a very good closing statement to balance this. Country Program Manager of UN Habitat. Someone, Christopher, has to speak for everyone, right? Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. What a productive afternoon. And thank you to everyone who participated and tuned in for this webinar. We do hope that you learned something. And I think one brilliant lesson to learn coming from David Lichu that I picked up is this: don't underestimate what you might earn if you invest in real estate. Those numbers he gave should be something that you take in with you and consider for your retirement also, frankly. So take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Hi, Gab.
Hi, Mom.
What's that?
This is us at home. Do you remember the playground? We went down the slide, then we went round and round, then we went swimming. and we saw a shark. And then we played soccer, and the crowd went wild. But the best part is this.
Who's that?
Dad! I love our home. There's so much to do, so much more to life. SMDC.
Mike and I, we're so different. He likes it cool.
She loves it hot. I keep it pretty intense.
While I'm all about keeping the calm. I believe in variety.
I stick with the usual, especially food.
Despite it all, we get along well.
It helps when your home is right beside a mall. So much to love. So much more to life. SMDC.
Since I got my new place, I've enjoyed every single day here. Hotel-like amenities, attentive staff, resort-style living, all in a premium location. So life here is easy and convenient. That's why I invested in another unit. I can earn more, and they can enjoy the very same things I enjoy at home. What a life! So much more rewarding. So much more to life. SMDC.
SMDC.